Hi. This response is for JHBowden. First off, I'd like to thank you for your response. I thought what you talked about is very well thought out. You're obviously very well read, and I appreciate that. I'd like to retort to some of your observations, some of your conjectures. First of all, the idea that there's an evolution of social institutions and that we have to somehow protect the social institutions that are there. I agree that the evolution of social institutions isn't something we want to destroy. We don't want to destroy the social institutions, but at the same time we have to make sure that social institutions have some sort of evolutionary pressure towards progress, towards the truth. Okay, I think one of the big mistakes the neocons have made is that in trying to protect current institutions, they have neglected this pull from fundamentalism. That fundamentalism is always pulling back on progress, saying, you know, we have to stop this, we have to go back to the way things were. And there's always this tension from fundamentalism trying to pull civilization backwards. And I think if you don't have some forward pressure for the evolving of social institutions, they're only going to go backwards. Okay, so consider me a progressive in that way. As you know, maybe liberal is not the correct term. Maybe you should call me a progressive, because I believe that there is progress. We don't need to keep institutions the way they are. I think there's a pull towards fundamentalism if we try to maintain a hands-off approach. So I think we need to provide some sort of impetus so that our social institutions will evolve. Okay. Let's see. The second thing is maybe this is also something that's characteristic of progressives rather than what you would call a liberal. But I do believe there is some means of being able to reason about objective moralities. I think there is a difference between right and wrong. It contains a lot less certainty than religious beliefs and other sorts of beliefs. There's far less confidence on my part that any particular position I take is absolutely correct. But I do believe there are cases where these differences between right and wrong are more obvious than others. And certainly in cases where they're obvious, we should certainly acknowledge the fact that there is some objective measurement for being able to determine what's good or what's bad. Okay, so I'm not a relativist, not in the strict sense. I don't throw a blanket waiver over everything, saying everything is relative. I think there is a means of reasoning about objective morality, and I've made videos prior to this one where I've tried to explain in some degree of detail how I arrived at that, and it's somewhat derived. It's not immediately obvious. Okay. As far as economics go, I don't consider myself a socialist. I consider myself not a capitalist either. I think that either one by itself cannot function. I think to a large extent that markets work, but there are exceptions to where markets work. I think there are natural monopolies. I think the government is probably the most natural monopoly. You don't want to have several governments competing. That's not going to work. Okay. So there are natural monopolies. There are things where there's value added to there being a monopoly, you know, such as communications. Obviously, if everyone's on the same network, it greatly adds to the value of that network, and that's why the internet, a public resource, rose to the height it has, is because it was connected to everything, and all of a sudden it became the focus. Everyone wanted to connect to it. All the minor players just fell to the wayside. AOL and Prodigy and all those other guys that were proprietary and sort of encapsulated, they all sloughed off because the internet was the one communications medium that everyone wanted to connect to. So there are natural monopolies. And for those, we do need to be careful about how we organize those. And certainly, capitalism is not going to work. The profit motive is not going to work with a government We're seeing how that's breaking down right now with the crony capitalism that's going on right now with all the defense contractors and the way Iraq has turned into a supreme clusterfuck. All right, so so I'm not a socialist, but I'm not a pure capitalist either. All right. As far as countercultures go, cultures and countercultures, to me, the individual is still the one that has the supreme rights. Individuals need rights. I think the more organized society becomes, there are social organizations that arise naturally, such as corporations, the families, churches, and what have you, people that share some common goal or some common belief. And these organizations are what give power to people's opinions. Okay, so I don't think that social organizations need to be protected. I think they already have a lot of power. I think for individuals it's a lot harder for them to have power, and I think individuals need to be protected with rights, because I think an individual has to have the ability to disagree. It always a fundamental new change, a new truth always comes from a single individual first, and unless you have some way of protecting individuals from social organizations, the social organizations will dominate and culture will stagnate. All right. So I think that protecting the individuals, I think probably the best way of protecting individuals is by giving them their privacy. Social organizations, on the other hand, should be very transparent. So, as far as rights go, I think that individuals should be granted rights to privacy. I think that corporations and other large social organizations should be made much more transparent than they currently are. Especially government. Government should be extremely transparent. All right. So I think it's that transparency that is necessary in social organizations in order to keep their power in check. Right? And as far as countercultures go, just to continue, I think that in a lot of cases radicalism is something that statism legitimizes. That is, if you actively seek to squelch people with their opinions and they believe they're right, coming down hard on them with the state is not going to change their minds. It's only going to make them more radical. It's going to create radicalism. So I think within statism contains the seeds of radicalism, because there are going to be people who are going to disagree. And if you don't allow those people to disagree in their own way, to express themselves, then they are going to become more radical. I think that's only natural. So I think statism and radicalism are two poles of the same phenomenon. Okay, I think if you get rid of a lot of the statism, that people are naturally drawn to do the right thing, and that's where we get into vice and viciousness. I think a lot of what progressives feel today, liberals or progressives, whatever you want to call us, is that vice is very much a psychological condition. It is an addiction. Okay, that is, people who are addicted to things engage in vice, and vice is self-destructive behavior. Now, for me, that involves education, but of course, people, can rationally know the truth and still not do the right thing. I think to a large, and that's what addiction is all about. So, there are ways of people to cope with addiction, to be able to kick their addictions, and I think that's something that we should explore more. Is finding out what are the driving forces behind addiction. How can people change their addictions? I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done with that. And I think if we treat vice as an addiction, as self-destructive behavior, I think that, and if it's not self-destructive, to me, that's not a vice. Okay, but if it's self-destructive, then it's probably some kind of addiction, and then the person needs some help in order to overcome that addiction. Okay, through information, correct information, and in training or for some other means, that addiction is very much people's personal problems, not a social problem. So anyways, that's my response. Again, thanks for your video. I really appreciate it. I thought you explained yourself very well. Thanks. Bye.